out there. This video is by request by Wenshen Dunman High and also Palak from Temasek Junior College. So today we're going to look at quota, government policy, alright, government intervention. And essentially the quota is a quantity restriction and it is part of your legislation or regulation. Okay, so the fact that it is a quantity restriction, it should give you an idea that the objective of a quota is to reduce the quantity. Okay, you can see it from the perspective of reducing the quantity consumed or reducing the quantity produced. Okay, and usually it is both, right? And why does the government want to reduce the queue? So this can be linked to your other concepts, your market failure concepts, such as demerit goods as well as negative externality. Okay, let's take a look at how the diagram looks like. You have your usual demand supply and the usual market equilibrium over here, and then the government comes in and imposes a quota. Now, in order for the quota to be an so-called effective quota, it can't be here, right? Because if it is here, there's no effect on reducing Q because the market equilibrium is already below the quota. So it doesn't make sense for the quota to be imposed here. And so what we consider to be a quota that has an effect on the market would be a quota that is imposed such that the amount is below what is currently the equilibrium Q. Okay? So if you look at the diagram, the quota is imposed here, whatever this amount is, it becomes like a wall that prevents Q from exceeding this amount. Can't push through. Okay, and that's the government regulation, right? The law says you can't have more than this Q. Okay, so what happens is that with this wall, it is going to distort the supply curve. The supply curve is now going to look like this, the usual supply curve over here, and then it hits a brick wall. And at this brick wall, it will have to go up. Because once it hits this Q, regardless of the price, you can give higher price. Price can increase, but the producer cannot increase the quantity supplied because that's the law, right? That's the quota. Okay, so legally the producer cannot do this, right? So the quota becomes like a brick wall. Once the Q quantity supplied hits the limit, then it can only go upwards, which means that the supply curve actually becomes perfectly priced in elastic at Q2. So this now becomes the new supply curve, S2. Okay, the quota sort of distorts the supply curve, and now you got S2 as the supply curve. And so from here, S2 will intersect the demand curve and you get P2 and Q2. So this is what the quota policy will do to the market. Okay? Now once you got this, the rest is usual demand supply analysis. Okay, so what do I mean by that? For example, if demand were to fall, right? You got fall in demand. Okay, then this is going to be the new equilibrium. Okay, it's going to be Q2 and then P whatever here. Right? So fall in demand, then it intersects the S2 supply, and then this is going to be the new market equilibrium. Okay, so usual stuff, right? And of course, it can also be the demand increasing. Okay, So then the new equilibrium will be somewhere up here. Okay, so I just have to draw, okay, this S2 up here. There you go. And the new market equilibrium will be somewhere up there. Okay, make sense? Simple stuff. Okay. Now similarly, supply. Now, but supply a little bit complicated, may not be so easy to see. So what I usually recommend is basically I like to do it like this. Let's say for some reason supply falls. So I like to draw fall in supply. Okay, like this, like your usual, like ignoring the quota, the supply curve would have fallen like this, right? Fall in supply. Okay, but now I know that the quota policy is going to distort this supply curve. Same thing. Okay, and therefore what it means is that this part has to disappear. So because of the quota policy, now my new supply curve is actually and then upwards again. Alright? So given this fall in supply, you can see that there is actually no change in the market equilibrium. The market equilibrium stays here. Okay? But that's not always the case, right? For example, if my supply curve were to have fallen a lot more drastic fall in supply. Okay, then what's going to happen now? Now your supply is going to be over here and then up. Okay, and where will the new market equilibrium be? The new market equilibrium, supply intersect demand, will be here. Okay, so it is possible, right, for you to have a new market equilibrium where the Q is below the quota. It is possible. Okay, and in this scenario, then your quota is no longer an effective quota because the market equilibrium quantity now is below what the quota is. So the quota as good as no effect on the market. That's possible, right? So when you have a very drastic fall in supply, in supply, then this can happen. Okay, where you have this market equilibrium such that the Q can be below the level of the quota, and now the quota has become as good as non-effective, okay, because there's no effect on restricting Q. Okay, similarly, just to show it to you, that over on the other end, when you have a very huge fall in demand, can you see? Very huge fall in demand, it can also bring the market to this equilibrium, and likewise you can also have a Q that is below the level of the quota. That's also possible. Okay, and again, this quota now becomes as good as non-effective, okay, because it is not restricting the Q in any way, given that the market equilibrium quantity is below the level of the quota. Okay? One final scenario for you. I drew a fall in supply, so let's just complete it. I show you an increase in supply, so something like this, right? So what's going to happen? This part must disappear, right? So now looking at it, you can visualize that your new supply will therefore be something like this and then go up. And in that case, the equilibrium still remains here. Right? So increase supply, okay, but increase supply supposed to be more Q, right? But then cannot more Q lah. Why? Because quota, the brick wall is here. So the Q cannot, the equilibrium Q cannot increase. Right? So it makes sense. Okay, it remains here. Okay? Okay, so feel free to replay the video if that was too fast for you. That's the advantage of sharing this video. Now we are going to look at examples of quota. This is a famous one that all of you will learn at some point, COE policy. In Singapore, it is imposed on new cars, and obviously to control the car population in Singapore, and why it's got to do with negative externalities generated. Okay, congestion, pollution, etc. Alright, if you have not learned this, then you must be very new to economics and you will learn it soon. Now, there are also quotas imposed on bike sharing firms in Singapore and, for example, in Shanghai as well. Okay, and you may read up about this. It is another case of negative externalities generated. I think all of us have ever experienced, right? Your bike strewn on the pavement or strewn in a very unsightly way around the bus stops and so on. Okay, that is your negative externalities generated by bike sharing. Okay, and as a result, one of the policies that have been imposed is actually quotas to control the bike population, so that hopefully you don't have too many bikes, okay, lying around in canals and God knows where, right? Foreign worker quotas. This is true, for example, in Singapore as well. Okay, there's quantity restrictions. Okay, and then there's also such a thing as import quota, but this is something that most of you will learn only under macro, okay, or international. Okay, and so just FYI for now, and the diagram actually looks different. Okay, but it is also a quantity restriction on imports. Why is it that quotas may be implemented? What's so good about a quota? I would say that quotas can provide the government with a greater certainty in controlling the queue. That's pretty obvious, right? Because the government is imposing a limit on the queue. So they will have greater control over the queue. Okay? You can contrast this with other policies such as tax. You may impose a tax, but there is no guarantee how much the queue will fall, right? So you impose the tax and then you find that the queue fall only so little, and therefore that may not satisfy your objectives. Okay. Similarly, education campaigns, right? You can nag, okay, and then the queue may not fall, right? So that's one big advantage of quota over your other policies, greater certainty in controlling the queue. And also, I think it is less politically sensitive, more acceptable than imposing a tax. Imagine if you impose a tax, the first thing that people are going to complain about is, that means we have to pay more lah. Government just trying to earn more money lah. Okay, all these complaints and all this cynicism and so on and so forth, okay, will fill the coffee shops, right? But a quota can help to avoid that. Okay, although you will find out in a short while that a quota, and in fact you already saw it as well, a quota also can lead to higher prices. Okay, but that's not so obvious, right? When you impose a quota, the focus is on the queue, right? But when you impose a tax, the focus is on money, right? So the attention is already immediately on, what does it mean? Got to pay higher price. So that is the another advantage. Finally, there are problems and limitations, obviously. One is the need for effective enforcement. Right? You can pass whatever laws you want, but if there is no effective enforcement, And with the need for enforcement comes enforcement as well as monitoring costs, which is part of enforcement. Okay, you need to monitor, you need to enforce. There are costs involved. Okay, so that is related to the government's budget. That can result in opportunity costs incurred, etc., etc. All right. Now, you think about it. Bike sharing firms, you may impose a quota on them, but if you're not enforcing, you never know, right? They may be actually supplying more bikes than they are allowed to. Okay, so maybe the government needs to check that out. And also, in reality, the quota is going to lead to the higher price. Okay, and therefore, we also have some equity concerns, some equity issues here. The good now may become less affordable to the lower income. Okay, so that can become an issue of equity as well. Alright, so with all policies, there are advantages and there are also problems and limitations, so you need to be aware of them. I hope this has helped to strengthen your understanding, your knowledge of how a quota works. And let me know if you have any comments and whatever other requests that you may have. See you again soon. Ciao.